Hello and welcome to One on One. I'm Vernon Ramazar, and my guest today is actually a very interesting gentleman. You may recognize him from Animal Planet, Whale Wars. Peter Bethune, conservationist. Welcome to the program.
Good to be here.
And I've been told I can call you Pete.
Yes.
So I shall take advantage of that.
No worries.
First of all, condolences to the people of New Zealand on your loss with the earthquake, because you are a Kiwi after all.
Yeah, very tough time back in New Zealand right now. I spoke with my family and they're all good, and the friends I've got down there are all okay, but man, there's a lot of people hurting in New Zealand right now.
Very, very troubling times.
Yep. Yeah, indeed.
Well, let's get on to the reason you're here. You're here to talk, obviously, about conservation. You've been on the island looking at the matter of sea turtles.
Yeah, look, we got contacted by the Trinidad Eco Warriors about 4 or 5 months ago, and they started telling us a little bit about what was happening with turtles in Trinidad and Tobago, and when I sort of had a look at it, I thought it might be something that I could come and help out on. It seems like there's two distinct issues here. You've got the leatherback turtles, which are caught as bycatch, and then you've got the actual hunting of turtles through a legal hunting season. And sort of both of those issues I've been doing a little bit of digging on it and trying to understand the fisherman's perspective and the conservationist perspective and also the government point of view.
But in terms of the actual damage to turtles, I mean, is it caused by fishing the nets, for example? Or?
The nets is the worst thing. If you take the leatherbacks at the moment, there's about 18,000 breeding females left in the Atlantic population. Last year alone, 1,000 drowned in nets in Trinidad and Tobago. So that's 1,000 of only 18,000 left. And if we don't do something soon about this, they will be lost. If you take the Pacific leatherback turtle population, that is already doomed. Their numbers are so low that they cannot sustain the population. And the same will happen to the Atlantic leatherback if we don't act soon. And
we're probably one of the major nesting grounds for the leatherback turtle in the world.
Absolutely. You have the number 2 and the number 3 nesting beach for leatherbacks in the world. You know, I think Trinidad should become the turtle capital of the world. And in terms of ecotourism, it's perhaps very few people outside of real staunch conservationists know this is the most wonderful place to come and see these leatherbacks nest. An extraordinary experience for those who are lucky enough to do it. And at the moment, I think Trinidad doesn't really make the most of that.
And yet we are pushing ecotourism, which is rather odd.
Yeah, well, look, if you are to become the #1 ecotourism country for leatherbacks, you can't at the same time be hunting green turtles and hawksbills and other turtles that come here. And so there's this little bit of a battle at the moment. You've got this indigenous population that have hunted turtles for centuries and have an expectation of continuing to do that. You've got the conservationists who are looking to preserve the turtles. But the facts of it are, and you know, I know this because I spoke with many fishermen over the last week, the number of turtles they're catching is reducing, and more importantly, the size of the turtles they're catching is reducing. And there was one specific turtle that we ended up purchasing off a fisherman for about $1 a pound. It was 110 pounds. And the fisherman said it's been a long time since he caught that one that large, a green, and it wasn't even at sexual maturity yet. So most of the turtles they catch now have not even bred. And that's a situation that will lead to the extinction of that turtle, or certainly the eradication of them in this area.
Well, I know you're trying to look at a balanced view of it, obviously, the fact that indigenous communities do traditionally capture the turtles. But do you think there is perhaps a need at this point for putting a ban?
Yeah, I believe the government should introduce a ban. And I met with Minister Barat on Monday, and he made a commitment to me. He said he will introduce a ban by the end of the year. But how that will be presented to the fishermen, and you know, there's talk that maybe the fishermen, as part of their fishing packages, they get subsidised engines and boats and things like that here. There might be some sort of package to perhaps placate the fishermen. But, you know, I think in this day and age, we shouldn't be hunting turtles when the bulk of them are endangered, and when, you know, Trinidad is trying to sell itself as an ecotourism destination.
There's an analogy with whales, isn't there, in terms of the exploitation of something that doesn't necessarily need to be exploited anymore? Yeah,
most certainly. Yeah, there's a lot of similarities between the two. I guess I do sympathise with the fishermen. You know, we had one group of fishermen, they took us round and we had dinner at their place. There was another group who talked to us, you know, quite passionately about, you know, my father and my grandfather, my great-grandfather have all been fishermen here, and we've always eaten turtles, and that's what we do. But if they do continue hunting the turtles, and other nations in the Caribbean continue hunting, they will be all gone anyway. So maybe it's better that we do act now. And, you know, sometimes hard decisions have to be made by politicians, and I believe this is one of them.
But in terms of employment, in fact, the eco aspect can provide employment as well.
Absolutely.
Because certainly in some villages in the northeast, the whole community gets together and basically protects the turtles and makes money off of it by being guides.
Yep, and that's much better money you're making than you know, the $50 that the fishermen might make in killing a turtle. If you take Tonga, which has done a really good job of ecotourism on their whales, they reckon every single whale that goes in there is worth $1 million in terms of tourist dollars. But it's really promoted as an ecotourism destination, and you go and swim with the whales. I believe Trinidad can do a similar thing with the turtles here. Those leatherbacks nesting, it's an extraordinary experience, and it's not really promoted in the way it should be at the moment. I think you guys can really benefit from having, you know, arguably one of the best leatherback nesting areas in the world.
But there needs to be political will, doesn't there, to make that
Absolutely.
change?
You need political will, and you need a bit of political backbone. And you know, there's
Which
a lot
isn't
of
always prevalent in the Caribbean.
That can be very lacking. But look, meeting with the minister, it was very positive. He had the director of fisheries in there, and I came away thinking that I believe they will introduce that legislation. If they don't, I'll be back here and you know, working to make sure that they do. You know, they can't just sit on their backs. The trouble you've got with politicians, they've got a full in train. And at the moment, they're dealing with the death penalty, and they've got policemen on strike and many other things. So the job of myself and maybe groups like the Trinidad Eco Warriors is to bring this issue to the top of their in train and make them, okay,
make some
noise.
noise.
We've still got that turtle thing going on. But what's going to happen if they don't do something? It's a really bad look, the slaughtering of turtles. And you know, there's been a couple of short video sequences filmed of turtles being killed in Trinidad, and the footage is gruesome, and it's a really bad look for this country.
Well, even being tortured, in fact, on some of the beaches, people using them as sort of toys, almost standing on them and abusing them.
Yep, or just leaving them on their back and leaving them for a week until, you know, they take them to the market the following week to sell them. You know, overseas, that's a really bad look, and I can understand that's what fishermen have traditionally done, but, you know, in this day and age, I think Trinidad is moving on from those things. And
it doesn't make it right.
Absolutely, doesn't make it right.
Now, you're known for being somewhat of a fan of drastic action, certainly when it comes to whales. Do you think there'll be a point where people need to take drastic action?
No, I don't think so. I think, you know, in terms of my conservation, I believe you pick your battles. You pick the battles you can win, and you also need to pick the tactics you're going to use. And I think over the turtles in Trinidad, I believe the government will introduce this legislation, and hopefully this year. And I think some work to be done with the fishermen to encourage them not to go hunting or setting their big nets through the key zones that the leatherbacks come through, for example. I don't think we need any real drastic action on this. I think we just need to work with the fishermen and work with the government, and I think you guys will have a great solution here.
But it's out of our control in terms of the Caribbean government to some extent, isn't it? Because we have Taiwanese vessels, for example, going through our seas. We have no control over them when they're on the high seas.
Look, I came here to deal with the turtle issue, and in the meeting with the minister, it became very apparent this agreement with the Taiwanese is cloaked in shadows, and no one really knows. The minister didn't know. The director of fisheries, she said that there might be some confidentiality issues, that they're not able to actually release the information to us. Now, the fisheries is probably, arguably, your fourth or fifth most valuable resource you have. You've got 120 vessels, we think, fishing in your waters, and no one knows how long is this contract for, how much was paid, when does it expire, is it an automatic renewal, do they have the right of renewal, can you issue it to someone else? And you know, it's the most horrifying thing I found out on my trip. 120 vessels here, no oversight, not a single observer on those vessels. And if you take countries that have their fisheries well managed, and you know, New Zealand is a case in point, every foreign vessel in our waters has to have a paid observer from our country on there. And those observers are well paid, so they're not prone to be bribed. And your fisheries at the moment, I believe the Taiwanese are raping it. You know, we went to a market the other day, and the fisherman is selling little wee baby sharks. And so I went and had a chat to him, and it was a butcher there, not a fisherman. But anyway, he said, look, we just don't get big sharks here anymore. We went and chatted to the fishermen on the coast, and they're saying we don't catch big sharks anymore. And it's no surprise, because you've got 120 Taiwanese longliners offshore, all longlining for sharks, and probably doing shark finning. According to the stats from Hong Kong, you guys are the 19th largest supplier of shark fin to Trinidad, and yet no one in the government seems to kind of know anything about this. You know, I believe there's a lot more work to be done in here on protecting your fisheries, and part of it is to introduce a law to ban shark finning. Oh, here's
Perhaps
something.
you should explain what that is. A lot of people may not know.
So shark finning, what they do is they catch a shark live, they cut off its fins, and chuck it back in the water.
To die.
To die. And it represents only 5% of the weight of the shark is consumed. We actually found out there's a product you guys eat called shark and bake. Mm-hmm. Most of that shark is coming from overseas now. It's not even local shark anymore. And that's a disgrace for a country like Trinidad and Tobago that has one of the healthiest, or did have one of the healthiest fisheries in the world. And sadly, what is happening here is the same thing that is happening in many countries through Central and South America and through Africa. They negotiate deals and they have these foreign vessels come in and clean out the shoreline. And while I've got a lot of sympathy for local fishermen here, I've got no sympathy for the Taiwanese and also the Venezuelans who are coming into your waters.
But the question is why? Why would any nation negotiate a deal?
At the moment, let's consider the enforcement. At the moment, you have 2 enforcement officers for the whole of Trinidad and Tobago. You have 15 officers to go around checking your stereo is too loud. Mm-hmm. You know, I've got no problem with loud stereos, but I sure have a problem with your fisheries being cleaned out by foreign vessels. 2 people, they're on a day rate. You know, and a day rate are sometimes not the most motivated employees. They're not going to go and risk themselves chasing, you know, Venezuelan vessels or those sort of things. You know, they're too busy wandering around the shore. And the minister made a commitment. He said they would be increasing that to 10. I still think 10 is way too few. I think this country really needs to wake up and start protecting this fishery. And it starts with getting to the bottom of the agreement with the Taiwanese. It also revolves around putting a policy in place on shark finning. It's got to be banned. You can't allow shark finning in your waters. Ensuring that the turtle exclusion devices on the trawl nets are there. The fishermen we spoke to, they said not a single, they had never seen a single turtle exclusion device on any trawl net in Trinidad and Tobago, and yet according to your law, it's compulsory.
So you can actually avoid catching turtles
Yeah,
by simple measures?
These are the trawlers where they trawl along
Right.
a big net, and these tend to be the larger vessels that do this. It's compulsory to have this, what's called a TED, or turtle exclusion device, and it's like a grid or a plate that's in front of the entrance to the net, and the turtles kind of hit the thing and bounce off the side
right,
rather than going inside. So there's many things that this country has to do to start looking after its fishery.
Do you think environmental activists can actually make a difference? If we look at the matter of whales, I know there was some change in Japanese policy, I believe it was a few days ago, but do you think that what you've been doing all these years has made a difference?
Yeah, I believe so. I think to affect change, you need various different elements coming into play, and activism plays a role in often bringing something to the attention of the politicians, bring it to the attention of the media and the public in general. And you know, sometimes direct action can limit the stocks that they catch. You know, take some direct action here. If you've got Venezuelan boats coming in here, if you start actually catching those boats, bring them in, impound the boat, deport the buggers back to Venezuela where they came from, they'll start to take notice and they'll start to lose money because they're losing boats. So direct action has a role, the government has a role to play, and the public has a role to play to say, we're pissed off about this, we don't want to see our fishery cleaned out by foreign vessels. We want to see those fish available for local people.
Now looking at you, you've got the whole activist look going, but in fact, your background is rather odd for an environmentalist, right? I mean, you think about it.
Yeah, look, I started off as an oil exploration engineer and worked through the Middle East and North Sea and a few other places. And then I started a high-tech company making cameras to guide robots. I guess it's like I've swung over to the dark side now that I've come over to conservationist. But I'm not, you know, a lot of people think I'm radical, and I don't think I am. Like, I'm very passionate about what I do. And when I come to a place like Trinidad and I see this amazing environment you got here, and then I go and see a bunch of dead turtles on the side of the beach, and I see a couple of Taiwanese boats out there cleaning up your coastline, it really upsets me. And, you know, I'm lucky to be in a position that I can, you know, get out and hopefully affect a little bit of change and you know, maybe support the groups like Trini Eco Warriors who brought me here.
Now, apparently biodiesel was the gateway drug for you to get into activism.
Yeah, a little bit, because I came out of the oil industry, towards the end of my time there, I became increasingly interested in renewable fuels. And so I started researching them and came up with this idea to build a powerboat, to fuel it on biodiesel made from waste cooking oils, and we used it to set a record for a powerboat to circumnavigate the globe. So that was in 2008. We went around the globe in just under 61 days and fueled the boat totally on biodiesel made from cooking oils out of restaurants.
Was it like a snap moment where you suddenly realised you had that passion for environmentalism?
No, it sort of evolved. My passion started off in renewable fuels. That was what I understood having come out of the oil industry. I got on this very cool boat called Earthrace, and spent 4 years
Which
travelling.
changed its name eventually.
Yeah, it changed its name to Anti-Gill when it joined Sea Shepherd. So I spent 4 years on this boat travelling the globe, and increasingly I saw the problem of poachers and illegal fishing, illegal bottom trawling, and it started to upset me a little bit. And gradually I learned more and more about it, and then middle of last year I'd kind of had enough. I'd finished my sponsor obligations in terms of the record attempt. What am I going to do now? I gave Paul Watson a call and teamed up with Sea Shepherd and had, what was part of a very historic campaign last year in Antarctica.
Although you did have a falling out with them eventually, I gather.
Yeah, look, Paul and I don't see eye to eye on things, but I respect what he's achieved, and Sea Shepherd and Paul Watson have done an extraordinary amount on marine conservation. And look, I don't need to work for him. I can be effective, hopefully, with my own organisation, and happen to work on turtles and shark finning and other things.
Now, you said you've travelled the globe. I think we know that at this point. In terms of how conservation is handled, do developing countries have a worse situation going on than developed world?
Yeah, it is harder in developing countries. There's a few things happen. First, if you take Trinidad's agreement with the Taiwanese, that is still cloaked in darkness and we don't know about. But it's very easy.
Happen in developing countries.
Yes,
yeah.
it's very easy for those governments to be steamrolled. So you've got a big company, Taiwanese, come in, they wave a big fat check out at the people's noses. Maybe there's a few backhanders. Developing countries, often there's a little bit more bribery and corruption. And no way am I saying that that's happened in this case, but developing countries tend to have a little bit more of that, and they end up getting screwed on the agreements. A large country like Australia, if you look at their fishery agreements, they're rock solid with countries like Taiwan. And then secondly, you've got this, say, an indigenous population that has expectations to continue eating iguana, eating turtles and these kind of things. And that's what they've done historically, and there's an expectation that will continue. And so I see it here, you've got part of the population that are quite appalled by the fact that turtles have their throats slit and get cut up and butchered. But it's like they're aware it happens, but it's off in the countryside somewhere and they don't know. And then you've got the countryside, it's actually quite acceptable and it's part of the community event. I remember the turtle we got, this 110 pound green turtle. We took it into Parliament and we had it kind of lying on its back in this tray, and we wanted the politicians to come and see this turtle. And you could see they were visibly moved seeing this turtle completely helpless lying on its back in the tray. And I remember the minister, he said to me, how often does this happen? And I said, it's about 100 to 150 times a day. These things are killed through the hunting season. And I think he was quite moved by it. And so sometimes there's this disconnect between city people and country people. And I'm not saying either group is right or wrong. It's like we look at these things quite differently.
And part of your job is to actually bring the two together.
Absolutely. Yeah, bring the two together and make them understand. The fishermen are going to be upset if, turtles will, I believe the ban on hunting will happen here. Some fishermen will be upset, and part of our job and the government's job is to make them understand that we're doing this because if we don't do something soon, the turtles will be all gone in any case. And there's other ways that Trinidad can make money.
Well, and speaking only for this country, many parts of the country seem to have a callous disregard for animal welfare in general.
I think that comes from it's a developing country. It's got a lot of people who are almost sort of subsistence, where they're used to catching iguanas and all sorts of things in the wild. And I think gradually that will evolve out, and that's happened in many other countries where gradually the population gets less used to harvesting wild food, and they tend to go more towards farmed things.
And I guess in developing countries, the environment tends to be the lowest priority. Feeding themselves, things like crime.
Yeah, look, when you're worried about feeding your family, you're not fussed about the environment. That's low on your radar, very low on your radar. So
how do you bring it up on their radar then? Or is it even fair to?
Sometimes it's a case of making them aware of the consequences. I had fisherman after fisherman, when I went and explained to them, and I said, look, the turtle numbers are decreasing, and they agreed. They said, yep, we catch fewer today. And I said, the size of these turtles is decreasing, isn't it? And they agreed with that. And I said, look, if you keep doing what you're doing, in 20 years they will be gone in any way. And you could see them sitting there and reflecting on it. And, maybe I was one of the first people to tell them that, or maybe they'd heard it before and, just decided to go along. I don't know. But I think if it's explained to the fishermen why it's doing, they will be more accepting of it. Some will still resent it. Some will still go and hunt them or poach them out of season, or, when the ban comes in, poach them in any case. But I believe most of them will come into line and they will accept the ban, albeit begrudgingly.
Now, in terms of the developing world leading by example, we have some sort of glaring hypocrisies going on, for example, with Canada, which is an environmentally quite interested country, but they also have the seal hunt.
Yep.
which they justify with the same justification that Indigenous peoples are used to in their local communities.
Yeah, and the Indigenous argument there has very little credibility really when, you know, these are just white people who some of them are first generation sealers. Look, the environmental issues are prevalent in all countries, and Canada has certainly got a festering sore in the Canadian seal clubbing. You know, and that's pretty brutal. To go on 100,000 seals, they turn up and club them, and pretty much they skin them, the skins get sent to China for clothing. You know, I think it's a disgrace. And, you know, there's a lot of other people who do, but at the moment Canada's able to tread a fine line and keep on with that industry. As is Namibia, and Namibia's the second country that's doing seal clubbing at the moment. But, you know, hopefully pressure from groups like ours and other governments on that can affect change, and sometimes it takes a while.
And we also have Japan with their scientific whaling charade.
Yeah, the scientific whaling, yeah. They've got a hard job to prove that in court. You know, the Australians are taking Japan to the International Court of Justice over the whaling, and Japan has got to prove that it is scientific, and when the value of the science is only 2 to 3% of the value of the commercial part of it, which is selling whale meat in Tokyo, I think they've got a hard case.
Well, it's more of a joke, really, isn't it, when you think about it? The fact that they would even use that as an excuse.
Yeah,
when it so patently is not the reason that they're whaling.
Yeah, it really upsets me. Like, where they hunt is my backyard. You know, Antarctica's directly south of me, and these guys come sneaking past us each summer and hunt whales in my backyard. And for a lot of Japanese, they're kind of indifferent to whaling. They're not staunchly supportive. They're not opposed to it. It's like they know it exists, but they don't really care much about it. But there's a small chunk of old men who were raised on whale meat after World War II. Well, after World War II, the Japanese economy was stuffed. They had virtually nothing in the way of animal protein left in the country. MacArthur, who was the head of the American military, he went in, they got their Navy vessels, converted them to whaling vessels. So basically the Americans taught the Japanese how to ocean hunt for whales. And these men, who are now old men in Japan, very powerful, they run the fisheries, the Coast Guard, the government, the media there. And these are the guys that like whale meat. They're a very powerful demographic to take on, and that's why it's tough to get them to stop.
But the fact is the rest of the world has moved away from it. And Japan's a fairly progressive nation in other ways. You would think they would have gotten onto that.
Yeah, they've got two glaring sores on them at the moment. One is the whaling, and the other is the dolphin killing, where, you know, they provide the live dolphins for export overseas, and they kill, you know, I think it's about 100,000 dolphin a year get killed for food. And it's toxic. It's full of methyl mercury. The same for the whale meat. Whale meat has very high methyl mercury as well. But changing a culture is very tough. And I'd suggest too that Japanese culture is especially slow to change. If you're trying to change a culture that's ingrained in these old men, man, they don't want to change. It is nice that young people in Japan really eat whale. It's hardly consumed by them at all. And long term, you know, I believe Japan will stop whaling. And interestingly, the first 6 months of last year, which coincided with my 5 months in prison in Japan, whale consumption dropped 30% in Japan. So, you know, I think, you know, we can make a difference. If it's enough to stop them next year or the year after, I don't know. But
I noticed when you talked about your imprisonment in Japan, you smile. You're quite proud of it, aren't you?
Yeah, look, it served a purpose.
Because you made a statement.
Yeah, it served a purpose. You know, when I boarded the Shonan Maru at night off a jet ski, I think is the most dangerous thing I've done in my life, and I was terrified. But when I got on that boat, I knew I'd made a little piece of history, and I knew I would become a real pain for those Japanese. And so the goal from there was that they would take me to Japan and I would go through the court system. I did expect that they would deport me under immigration after a week, and that they wouldn't want to prosecute me because they had effectively rammed and sunk my boat, and so it would be a bad look for them. In the end, they didn't really consider that, and I got penalised quite heavily. So I did 5 months, but I have no problem with it. It served a purpose, and it really shone the spotlight on Japanese whaling like never before. And I think now, you know, if you look this year, whaling was a big topic around the globe, and that successful campaign we had last year is part of why everyone now is aware of whaling.
Are you a bit surprised at yourself sometimes that you would have gone from being an oil engineer to somebody willing to risk his life for a cause of whales?
Here's the thing, is when you get to work on something you really believe in, you're super lucky. And once I started doing that, it's very hard for me to go back and sell washing machines 9 to 5 or do something like that. Like I'm really blessed to get to do what I do, and to be part of that historic campaign for Sea Shepherd last year, I was very fortunate. And I was part of a very good team. You know, I was the lucky guy that got to board the Shonan Maru. There was about 25 people involved in that mission to get me on there. And, you know, I was the lucky guy at the thin end of the wedge, if you like. And, you know, I consider myself very blessed.
even as you face death.
Yeah, yeah.
We only have a few minutes left. I want to ask you, are you surprised with the commitments you've already received from the minister here? Like you didn't get much argument, did you?
Yeah, look, it was very. I think they've been considering this for a period of time. I know it was on their radar before I turned up in Trinidad, and I think perhaps by having myself here, the minister, you know, they pulled out the documentation they had on. They thought, oh, maybe we can go doing this. So I was encouraged that the minister was very upfront. He was upfront that he didn't know a lot about turtles and he didn't know a lot about the Taiwanese agreement. So it's good to see a minister that might have some honesty about him.
As opposed to bluster.
As often they'll bluff you. And you know, he was quite upfront. He said, look, I don't know a lot about these. Thanks for bringing these to my attention. I will spend some time on this. And he made a commitment. I will ban turtle hunting before the end of the year. And I look forward to that time.
Are you going to come back and check on him? Or just
yeah, for sure. I'm coming back to check on him. And he won't be looking forward to my next visit if he doesn't put that through.
And in terms of your contacts here now, is that going to be a sort of an ongoing thing for you to keep tabs on what's happening with the environment?
Look, hopefully I can help out here in other ways. I'd like to come back through the nesting season. I'd like to try and help promote the fact that you guys have got arguably the best beach for nesting leatherback turtles for ecotourism. You know, there's I think I can help you guys out a little bit, and I hope to.
Well, we're out of time, Pete. I just want to ask you: are we going to be seeing you on television anytime soon, confronting the Japanese again?
No, not anytime soon. I'm banned from Japan for 5 years.
But not the Antarctic.
Not the Antarctic, but Sea Shepherd's got that covered at the moment. I've got other projects to work on, and one of them is hopefully helping out in Trinidad and Tobago.
Well, we're very glad you're here. Pete Bethune, a pleasure having you on the program.
Mate. Thanks very much for having
Thank you so much. You've been watching One on One. Join us again tomorrow for another edition.